Good afternoon. My name is Jim Eskin. On behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 90th Nonprofit Empowerment webinar. You know, yesterday was Giving Tuesday. I don't think I've seen any results yet. Last year was the record $2.7 billion. And so for all of our nonprofits who are participating in Giving Tuesday, we hope it was a very successful day for you. But with my guest today, we think every day can be a big fundraising day through something that sometimes is overlooked, and that's the annual fund. And we're going to have a great discussion. My guest has too many credentials. I'm jealous of him. But before I introduce Anthony, we're going to do a little segment we call the Job Board. And today our guest is Janice Da Silva, and she's the Senior Director of Development with the UT Health San Antonio system. And she has two positions she's looking to fill. And so we're going to put there, you apply online. Janice, first of all, give us a little UT Health update and then describe the job you're looking for.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and to share with you on behalf of UT Health San Antonio. It truly is a moment amongst moments here at the institution as we are expanding not only within our development team, which has quite a few openings, but I'm going to focus on two today, but also really recruiting some expertise across the country as we have an opportunity here in San Antonio to serve a region of 5.5 million or so folks. In a really impactful way. And so we have 5 highly ranked professional schools of medicine, dentistry, nursing, health professions, and our graduate school. And we're really excited because we're getting ready to open a new school of public health. The other thing to mention—
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. We're also really excited right now. We have under construction and set to open in 2024 a new San Antonio multi-specialty and research hospital. And that's going to allow us to do provide some really incredible services where cancer patients will not have to travel to Houston, for example, to get care, but they'll be able to get treatments right here in San Antonio. And that's really one of our big initiatives here on campus. And so the two roles that I really want to highlight today, we are looking to secure team members and 2 director of development positions. And you're seeing us as it scrolls through on the screen here, several other roles that are open in our department as well. But at the director of development level, we're really looking for these individuals to embed themselves within our School of Nursing, and the School of Nursing portfolio will also have some overlap with some connection to the School of Medicine, as well as the School of Dentistry. That's the second position. So both of these are director of development positions. We work in close coordination with the deans of each of the schools to support their funding priorities, and really looking at this level of major gift officer being able to raise at the six-figure level and above in terms of major gift donors that we are engaging with. And
Janice, do applicants apply online? What do you do if you want to apply?
Yes, if you'd like to apply for the position, you can simply navigate to the posting here online and submit your application. You can upload your resume and answer the screening questions, and that should come our way once HR identifies you as a qualified candidate.
And we've put the link in the chat room, so you can click directly to that to go to this page.
Thank you.
And let me just say, Janice, on behalf of Andrew and me, we appreciate the tremendous service you all provide to the community, and particularly in the last couple of years. I mean, you were helping the community deal with something we've never seen before. And let us just say, we really appreciate everyone at UT Health for the service and leadership you have provided the citizens of South Texas.
Thank you, Jim. We are definitely all about partnering with the community to make lives better, and so appreciate the opportunity to share about these openings on our teams, and hope that if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us.
Okay, thank you, Janice. And now let me present our subject matter expert. Anthony Alonso has been in the fundraising business like me longer than he wants to admit. And was it 2016? He co-founded a fundraising firm called Catapult that's become a leader. He's right now based in Anderson, Nevada, which is, he can walk the casinos. And he's been held about every leadership position in our Association of Fundraising Professions. And I want to first thank you for the leadership you have provided to fundraising professionals and nonprofits. You have really enriched a lot of us, and for the services you have provided. Did I read that you have raised something like $1 billion over the last 10 years?
That would be correct. I haven't,
a lot
but
of
my
money.
clients have, and they've done a great job at doing it.
Well, thank you for being a subject matter. We're talking about Giving Tuesday, but with an annual fund, every day can be a giving day. But I first want to start with a real difficult question, Anthony. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, there are a lot of fundraising firms out there. What makes Catapult a little different and
Well, I think-
better?
I think there's a lot of great firms out there. I have actually been in business since 1996, Jim. I merged my company with another firm in 2016, and we became Catapult. But my firm has been around since 1996. It was Advantage Consulting. Some of you out there may know of Advantage Consulting. But I think one of the big differences with Catapult is that we're the only firm that I know of in the country that's completely full service. So the merger that was created in 2016 allows us to do everything from capital campaigns, which is the firm I merged with, did capital campaigns, one-to-one philanthropic, to highly personalized telephone outreach programs and to direct marketing programs for our clients. And I think we're the only firm that does all of it. It's kind of a one-stop shop. And I'd like to think that myself and Diane Carlson, my business partner, we both have over 35 years of experience. I always like to say I had hair when I started in this business, in this field. And I think we bring that to everything we do. And we believe in service back to AFP, service back to the nonprofit sector. And that's how we run our business. And that's how, we manage our team. And so we're proud to have, team members on staff that have been with us for 20, 25 plus years.
Well, thank you for the service and leadership you have provided to the professional fundraising community and to the nonprofit sector. One of the questions, we're going to get to the annual fund in about 15 seconds, but when I have fundraising experts like you on, I always like to ask this question. We have board members in our nonprofit that are usually business and community leaders that are absolutely fearless of anything they have to do in their personal or professional lives. With an exception, they are terrified of asking for a gift for a favorite nonprofit. Why do you think, particularly board members and other leaders, are so terrified of asking for the gift?
Well, I think because giving is very personal, right? And so there's always a fear of asking. In fact, we hire people who tell us afterwards, this isn't for me. I can't make the ask. I can't ask for money. And so the whole notion of asking for money is very difficult for a lot of people, and it's very personal to donors. And so not everybody can be a good asker per se.
Yeah.
They could be a good advocate. They could steward the relationship, but not everybody can make that ask. And so you got to make sure that you are training them to make the ask and letting them know it's a conversation that people want to give. You just need to have a conversation with them and find out what's going to make them feel good. Because ultimately giving is all about how the donor feels, right? And I think that that's part of what we miss a lot of times when we're trying to train our board members, that they're talking to people who usually already believe in the organization. So it's a matter of asking them what is going to make them feel good. How do they want their legacy to continue on through the nonprofit? Thank
you. I got one more macro question. You and I were taught that major gift fundraising had to be done face to face. That was the only way to raise money. And then social distancing came up about March of 2020. as we're beginning slowly to take these steps to get back to pre-pandemic conditions, what parts of virtual fundraising do you think are going to persist even as social distancing is dropped?
Well, I've always said, and I'll continue to say this from somebody who's run highly personalized phone programs for many years, that the best way to solicit any donor is always going to be face to face. That being said, one of the things that the pandemic really allowed us to do, if we were doing it right, and some nonprofits did do this right, was take advantage of this that we're on right now, Zoom, video conferencing, to reach mid-level donors who normally get overlooked. It gave us an opportunity to have these type of conversations with mid-level donors. And I think that's really long-term going to have an impact on fundraising, because we've found out, at least some of our clients, because we recommended to our clients that they use the opportunity of Zoom becoming the norm to reach out to those mid-level donors and have their major gift officers reach out to the mid-level donors. And so I think long-term, we're going to find out a lot more about those mid-level donors, and we're going to be able to move them up the giving pyramid. So that's one of the things I'd like to see stay from this pandemic, because I think it was an opportunity we were missing. A lot of organizations were focusing on those top donors who are assigned, and we're not spending any time with the mid-level donor.
I also think it breaks down some of the geographical restraints. You know, for a nonprofit would just say, be concerned with donors and prospects within a 100-mile radius. Everyone has gotten more comfortable with doing Zoom, forming a relationship with Zoom. And so I think some good things are going to come out. Our topic is the annual fund. You know, typically annual fund gifts aren't the largest that a nonprofit's going to receive. So Anthony, why is an annual fund so important?
Well, because they're the lifeblood of the organization. They're also your future major gift prospects. They're the pipeline. And if you run out of those annual fund donors, you're going to run out of pipeline eventually. And it's one of the things that we've seen over the last decade or so, as people have moved away from doing telephone solicitation for a variety of reasons. I mean, there's lots of reasons, like it's become unpersonalized, it's not being done right. But as people have moved away from that, it's really changed the pipeline. And I think we're seeing now nonprofits that don't have a pipeline for major gifts. And that's what I think is so important about annual giving, is it creates that pipeline. And if you're building that relationship with the donor and moving them from the $50 donor on up down the line, you now have in the long term, at least, your potential major gift prospect. And a lot of organizations have not spent enough time or energy over the last 10 years on that group.
Yeah. You know, one of the reasons I love annual fund gifts, they're typically given with unrestricted use when and where necessary flexibility. Can you talk about the importance of unrestricted gifts?
Well, it's critical to the organization. You know, in a lot of cases, when you're asking a major gift donor to make a gift, they want to put it towards this area, or you're asking for a specific building campaign. If you're in a capital campaign, you want unrestricted giving because you can use it in the area of greatest need, right? And so I always tell our clients that while they should be focusing on some of the areas that their giving is going to go to, it should still be generic. So there's a way to write an email, craft a letter to a donor that says, here are some of the ways that your unrestricted annual support is helping the organization, without saying that it's specifically going to one particular area. And if the donor wants it to go to a particular area, they'll let you know.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times you'll hear this from me during this a lot, Jim. I think a lot of times we try to decide as fundraisers for the donor. And I always say part of donor loyalty is not just the donor being loyal to us. It's about us being loyal to the donor. It's about letting them make the decision, not making it for them.
My perspective is one unrestricted dollar is worth two restricted dollars. Again, I think it's the gift that most nonprofit CEOs want, and I don't know why they seem to be resistant to ask for them. And the one thing we know, you don't ask, you don't get. That's not just the amount and timing, it's also the purpose. Let's talk about how a nonprofit can brand or name its annual fund program so it has some personality?
Well, I think that, that's an area where I've done these webinars before, as you know, and I've spoken live, and I've
Yeah.
always talked about getting the donors involved in that naming. I like going out on social media and saying, tell us one word that you think describes the organization. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think about our organization, when you think about our institution? Because you're going to find out from the donor what it means, and a trend will start to develop. And then you could really start looking at what name fits all these adjectives that they're coming up with. What is that name? I have a client here locally, which is a national client, but it happens to be here local, Miracle Flights, and their annual fund is the Cure for Distance. That came from going out and reaching out to donors and saying, what do you think about what we do? They happen to take sick kids to doctors that can't go to doctors in other states, right? And the donors started saying, it's really a cure for distance, and it became the theme. And so that's become the annual fund, and it's a nice catchy name for their annual fund.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great place to exercise some creativity and make it a good fit with the mission of your nonprofit.
Absolutely.
Hey, let's talk about what are strategies for acquiring, you talked about the annual fund being the portal. It's how they come into the nonprofit, and maybe they develop and elevate their giving from there. But what are strategies? Where do you find first-time annual fund supporters?
It depends on what type of organization you are. Obviously, if you're a university, you're looking at your alumni, you're looking at parents of the organization. If you're in healthcare, like Janice, you're looking at grateful patients, folks who have benefited from the care. What you always want to do is find the relationship, right? Because giving is all about having a relationship. And so, 20, 30 years doing this and doing calls for our clients. And I've never worked for a client whose prospects don't have an identifiable relationship with the institution, because I think that's critical in terms of success. You've got to have that identifiable relationship. And then you need to go out to them and spend some money to get them on board, to let them know and educate them about your mission. And I think a lot of times acquisition is very, very expensive.
Yeah.
And in the nonprofit sector, we don't look at it the same way that a business does, right? I've actually spoken live where I've said that the last dollar you spend on fundraising should yield you $1. And I've had a lot of development professionals look at me like I'm crazy. But at that point, you've exhausted every opportunity to maximize the return for your nonprofit. Yes, it may be expensive to get a new donor. It may cost you $1 on $1 to get that new donor, but you've got to look at the lifetime value of that donor.
Yeah.
We know that a non-donor will come on board and typically renew for a second year if done correctly at a 50% clip. And once you get them past the second year, we'll renew at 70%, right? But when you look at Amazon, I always give the example of Amazon. They expect to lose money on your Prime membership for 7 years. Expect to lose money because they know in the long run.
They've done okay, right?
All right, in the long run, they're going to make that money off of you.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times in the nonprofit sector, we don't look at it as a business. And to a certain degree, there's a lot to be learned from the business sector when it comes to acquisition of new donors.
What do you think a nonprofit should think about in setting tiers for its annual fund?
Can you repeat the question?
What do you think of a nonprofit setting tiers, like, gold,
Giving clubs?
silver, whatever, tiers for its annual fund program?
I know that there's a lot of different thinking on this. I've never been a huge fan of tiers, except when you get to the very high levels, because I think that for the most part, the donor doesn't care. They're giving because they believe in the organization. And then if you set up tiers, it becomes more and more difficult to upgrade the donor. It's very similar to when you are giving away premiums. I'm okay with giving away someone a pin afterwards to thank them and to steward them, but not as an expectation of the gift. Giving should be about philanthropy. It should be about the donor feeling good about giving and helping the organization. And when you set some of these tiers, sometimes people are giving and want to stay in the tier that they're in. It's harder to upgrade them to the next tier. it creates kind of a difficult path towards that next upgrade sometimes.
Well, let's talk about, in the spirit of that, we're talking about we're going to bring the donor in through the annual fund. What are possibilities and strategies for getting, Jim gives $100 as to his annual fund, and then Anthony wants him to continue that $100, but then support something maybe for $1,000 that has a lot more emotional appeal to Jim.
Mhm. I think that kind of thing, if done correctly, is again part of that donor loyalty that I talked about. Let the donor make the decision. Don't make the decision for the donor. Go to the donor. Tell them what you need, why you need it. I've said for 30 years now, over and over again, that I've not met a donor yet who's upset that you ask them for too much. It's when you ask them for too little that they get upset. When you ask
Hey,
them for too
repeat
much,
that. Hey, Anthony, repeat that. That's gold.
I've never met a donor who's upset about being asked for too much. They're usually flattered. But if you ask them for too little, they'll be upset that you don't think they could do more. And so that's important to keep in mind. And so I think going to the donor with a credible ask, one of the things we've, the whole notion I hear all the time, annual giving. We've trained our donors on annual giving being once a year, right? But you and I both know, Jim, that the church gets the majority of the philanthropic dollars every single year. When you look at Giving USA and you look at the numbers, that's because they ask every week and they have a credible reason to go back and ask every week, right? But as fundraising professionals, we've gotten donors into this habit of annual giving being once a year, right?
Yeah.
And that's our fault as fundraising professionals, right? Because the need exists throughout the year. And so we've seen when we go back with clients and we do a second ask, we'll do an ask in the fall and a second ask in the spring. If they're on a fiscal year, we're finding 50 to 60% of the donors who give in the fall will give again if you ask them again.
Hey, and this is in the same spirit of that point. What do you think of strategies to promote monthly giving by a nonprofit?
Well, first and foremost,
And
very
how do you
simple.
do that?
You said it at the beginning of this webinar. I think the simplest answer to that is you have to ask them that way, right? And a lot of times we're not asking them that way. I think multiple payment asks, whether it be quarterly or monthly, do a couple things. Number one is it gets the donor into a habit of giving, which is critical, right? It's much easier. We see renewal rates for donors that are on monthly or quarterly gifts of upwards of 80% as opposed to 70% for one-time donors, right? So it gets them into a habit of giving. It's easier to renew them. It also allows the donor to see their way towards making a much larger gift. All right. Typically, in its simplest way, there's much more to it, science to it than this. But we typically will take a client and say, okay, if this person is comfortable writing a check for $50, let's ask them to consider writing 4 checks for $50 over the course of the year. Right.
Mhm.
Our goal is to end up with at least 2, or maybe 4 checks of 25, which is doubled their previous giving. It becomes a lot more manageable for the donor to see their way towards making a larger gift. Again, when you look at church giving, someone gives $500-600 a year and doesn't even think about it because they're giving it every single week, right? And so we're missing out on that opportunity by not asking for a monthly gift. That being said, one of my biggest pet peeves is when someone is on a monthly gift and doesn't get another call back to their credit card expires, which has happened to me personally as a donor, right?
Yeah.
I've been on a monthly credit card gift, and the first call I've gotten from that nonprofit is in 18 months when my credit card expires and they need a new card. That's just bad stewardship of that donor.
Do you recommend that there be some type of thank you with each installment of the monthly gift?
It's so inexpensive now to send an email thank you, to send a digital voicemail thank you, at least once every 2 months or once a quarter, and certainly a good old-fashioned telephone call once a year to thank the donor personally and to try to get them to upgrade, because it's important to try to get the donor to upgrade, even if they're on that monthly gift.
Hey, what are strong ways to recognize and steward annual fund donors?
Well, there's a variety of different ways. I personally like Right. I don't know if you're familiar with digital voicemail or ringless voicemail, Jim.
Mhm.
But for those in the audience that are not familiar with it, those are voicemails that you could just drop in people's cell phones without the phone ringing. So if you've ever gotten a message and gotten, my phone didn't ring, and you listen to it, it was a ringless or digital voicemail. Those ringless voicemails cost pennies right now. They're 4 or 5 cents to send. They're very inexpensive. And you could have the CEO of the organization, you could have the executive director record a message and drop it as a thank you to the donors. And we do that for our clients every month. We thank the donor. If it's a university, we have a student record a message who's the recipient of the generosity, thanking the donor. We drop those
Love it.
voicemails. We've seen 20 to 25% increases in collection rates because of it. We've seen donor increases because of it. So I think that's very important. One of the other things that I did during the pandemic, and then I said on webinars during the pandemic. So if you've been on one of my webinars during the pandemic, sorry, you'll have to hear it again. But I talked about 5 by 10, right? One of the things I've done in business for many years is I tried to reach out to 5 new potential clients or contacts or old contacts by 10 a.m. every single day before the day gets away from me. And so during the pandemic, I told my clients, I said, by 10 a.m. every morning, I want you to call 5 donors that you haven't spoken to and thank them. Thank them.
Just thank them. Just thank them, right?
5 by 10, I called it. By the end of
Hey,
the
but
week,
and this is just to thank them. It's not to
just to
solicit
thank
them.
them, not to solicit them, just to thank them, find out how they're doing during the pandemic, thank them. Part of that donor loyalty, being loyal to the donor. By the end of the week, you've either left a message or spoken to 25 people, right?
Yeah.
And what was amazing about that, which I expected to happen, was that donors started sending in unsolicited gifts. Imagine that.
I love
They
it.
started
I
sending
love
in
it.
checks, right? One of the things I won't take credit for, but many clients have come back and told me after the pandemic they've continued to do it, is that it was a real mission moment for them. We tend to get lost every day in the day-to-day of what we do. We're trying to raise money. We have board meetings. We're preparing for a donor visit. That sometimes we lose sight of our mission and why we do what we do. And one of the things that clients told us is that that first hour really gave them some perspective as to why donors are giving and why it's important to them.
Yeah.
And it became a mission moment for them. And so many of them have continued to do it after the pandemic because it became such a routine for them and so critical in what they do. Plus they saw the benefits, obviously.
Yeah. It's where doing the right thing is also doing the smart thing. Here's a tough one. How do nonprofits, as we're getting to the beginning of a new year, how do you recommend nonprofits establish goals for their annual fund?
That's always tough, but the first thing you got to start with is what's the budget, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how much is the budget? And then from there, what's going to be really do a lot of segmenting. Who do you want to reach in a more personalized way? All right. It's almost like sifting for gold, right? And so who do you want to reach in a more personalized way down to the masses? And then what budget do you want to allocate to that?
Yeah.
In terms of setting specific goals, you really have to look at what has the donor previously given, right? One of the things that sets aside a consulting firm from most nonprofits is we spend a lot of time analyzing data, right? We've got all this data to look at, we analyze it, but that's not to say that you can't. If you've got a nonprofit, you should be looking at the data. How much did we raise? How much do we want to increase donors? Typically, you should be looking at upgrading donors about 30% each year. That should be your goal. And you're going to have some people that you're going to be able to significantly upgrade, some people that will stay flat, and those people somewhere in the middle, right? And you'll end up, if you do it correctly and you set ask amounts correctly, because it's critical then that you set the ask amounts to achieve that goal. And in looking at ask amounts, I always say at the end of the year, whatever your total asks were should be 35% of what you actually got in terms of an average. All right.
Well, you make the Hall of Fame if you have a 333 batting average, right?
That's
1 out of
correct.
3 is pretty darn good.
If your total ask are half of what you received, right? If you got 50%, you asked for too little. You left too much money on the table, right? So it goes back to donors not being upset by being asked, being loyal to the donor and letting them make the decision.
And as you said, if anything, they're flattered when they're asked for more, and they are frustrated when they're asked for less. So this next question picks up on that. How do I thank Anthony for his current gift, say of $1,000, but motivate him to give serious consideration to a larger amount, like 5 or 10,000?
Well, I think spending time meeting with Anthony,
Yeah.
using the phone. You know, I know one of the things over the last 10 years that I've heard over and over again is how the phone is dead. You know,
Yeah.
and you know, I'll do a live presentation. I'll say, how many of you use the phone, you know, or telemarketing of any kind for your goals? And I'll have 2 or 3 shy people in the back that raise their hands. And I usually turn to the crowd and say, the rest of you are lying. Because in what we do every single day, we're using the phone if we're doing our fundraising job effectively.
Yeah.
Whether it's to set an appointment to meet with a donor, calling a donor to thank them and steward them, we're using the phone. So it's not a matter of whether we're using the phone, it's a matter of how effectively we're using the phone, right? And the second most effective way to raise money other than face-to-face is still the phone. The reach rates may have gone down over the last 20 years because of the proliferation of caller IDs, et cetera, but it's still the second most effective way. You can talk about social media, email, we do them all, right? Social media, email, all these digital platforms, the second most effective way is still going to be the phone.
And the
you're having
telephone,
conversations.
the telephone relatively is very, very low cost.
And based on the return, yes. The initial outlay is more expensive, right? But if you look at cost per dollar, if you're doing telephone fundraising correctly, your cost per dollar is going to be 15 to 20 cents, as opposed to some of the other things that are out there where they're cheaper initially, right? It's much cheaper to send out thousands of emails, but you're not going to raise as much money out of it. So the cost per dollar is going to end up being much higher in the end.
Yeah.
Was there a question there?
It was Diana Hoyt. Diana, I want to repeat that question. It had to do with how can you make the calls if
That's
you're
true.
so busy planning events? And that's, I have definite opinions on events.
Yeah, I do too.
Let's jump, I'm not
I think-
crazy about events.
I think Diana
there are
has
much
those same
more
opinions we have based
effective
on the
ways to
question.
raise money.
Based on the question, Jim, I think Diana has similar opinions. And I think we spend a lot of time on events that don't raise a lot of money. And then not enough time.
And we
at
just
those
do it
events.
because we've been doing it always
Right.
like that.
And then not enough time at those events actually building relationships with donors that can give us more money. So
I think you can take the donor list from your last event and think of a major gift strategy.
and an event to
I
thank
think
them.
during the pandemic, we discovered, I think events were kind of on the way down. And now I think nonprofits have realized they can live without events.
I think that's true. I think one of the things, again, I recommended to clients during the pandemic was hosting donor Zooms like this to recognize donors. It's a very inexpensive way to recognize donors. And you could do it virtually. And there's platforms out there that are great for it. Remo is one of them. That's a great platform. It's kind of a Zoom, but it allows you to kind of sit in banquet styles, almost like you're at an event. And so something I encourage the audience to look at, something like Remo.
And you can bring together people from all over the country. Maybe your nonprofit has a charismatic leader in California, but you're based in New Jersey, and you can easily bring that person into the program.
Correct. That's absolutely right. One of the other things, and this is getting a little off topic, but that I talk to clients over the pandemic is look at your donor base. You have experts in your donor base. Bring them on to do free webinars for your donors on financial planning or whatever the case may be. It gets your donor engaged, that it gives your donor some value, and you can even get sponsorships for that, right? You can get that webinar sponsored.
Yeah, and I love that. And the donor's going to love it.
That's
you know,
correct.
you're just deepening the relationship where it's win-win-win. Let's move on to a different area. Have you discovered there's a certain demographic that fits best with the annual fund? Would it be younger people, mid-age people, seniors? is there any type of demographic that fits the annual fund program?
It depends on the nonprofit. If you're in
Yeah.
healthcare, obviously it's going to be an older demographic. So it really, in a lot of cases, depends on the nonprofit, but it also depends on what the nonprofit's efforts are, right? Because I think a lot of times over the last 10, 15 years, we have decided that the ZGen is really not going to give, right? And as a result, we haven't focused. It becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. We haven't focused on the ZGen, right? Well, we talked about free will, and we talked about Patrick, right? One of the things that has been identified through some of the research that Patrick and his team has done on the crypto side of it, right? Is that the average gift of ZGen through crypto is $482. Let me repeat that. $482 is the average gift through crypto of ZGen. So our assumption is the ZGen won't give. And that is an education issue, right? And it's one of my pet peeves because I think we've got to go after ZGen. ZGen just likes to get the information a different way, right? They want to know what impact you're making on society, on the world, on your community. And you got to phrase whatever it is. We all have some sort of impact we're making on our community.
Right.
That's how we have to phrase the ask. Whereas someone older might want to know what are the particular services that you're delivering, right? With ZGen, you have to be a lot more generic. And we've seen that over and over again as we look at, how to go after ZGen. The other thing that's been interesting over the last couple of years is that the trends are that ZGen is the fastest growing of respondents to direct mail. And that has not been our traditional thinking has been that ZGen is going to respond to social media. They're going to respond to email. But part of the problem has been that ZGen doesn't get mail, right? And so when they receive a piece of mail, they're excited.
Wow, what's this?
Right, what's this, right? And I've got, a 17-year-old and a 22-year-old, and I've seen it with them, right? They get mail and they're excited about getting mail. Whereas 80% of Americans open up their mail next to a garbage can, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it doesn't
Don't
even
even,
open.
you know what they do? They don't even open the mail.
Right,
They
it
look at
gets
the
lost.
envelope and it goes directly into the garbage can. What are good ways to tap annual fund donors to acquire other annual fund donors?
Well, there's a couple things that can be done. And so that's always tough, right? Because you don't want to make your donor, you have to do work. But there are simple
Is it a
ways.
way it can be fun? Is it a way it can be
There are
fun?
simple ways to be fun. Again, I hate to keep going back to some of the educational sessions I did during the pandemic, but one of the things that I recommended to my clients was that they take one of the emails they send out to the donor base a year, one of them, just one of them, and send them an email asking them to put out a birthday fundraiser on Facebook. A lot of times our donors are just doing it, right?
Yeah.
We're not asking them to. So we ask them to do it, right? And we not only ask them to do it, we give them the verbiage we want them to put on and the picture we want them to put on. So we make it really easy for the donor to put this on social media, right? So one of the nonprofits that did this was a nonprofit, in full disclosure, that I sit on the board of. So it's one that I personally support. And we sent out an email to 10,000 donors. We had 35 of them put up birthday fundraisers of the 10,000 emails that we sent. And we generated over $25,000 in gifts. New
That's
gifts.
a pretty good ROI.
To the organization. New gifts from one email. And so just like we ask donors for gifts, we can ask donors to consider doing this for us. And it's a fun and easy way for them to get involved and to do something for the organization.
You don't have to give names here and you can talk in generic terms, but can you share an example or a story of an annual fund gift donor who matured into a major gift donor?
Oh, I have so many of those because, as I said, when I started, I had hair, but there's one in particular that comes to mind, which was for a Northeast university. We took. I'll get to that question from Margie in a second.
Okay, thanks.
Jen. We took their telephone program, right, from 1.9 million a year to 13 million a year in collected revenue over the course of 10 years, right? And a lot of that was acquisition, obviously, and moving donors up the giving pyramid to the point where we were asking some donors for 10, 15, 20,000 over the phone. And they were giving it, right? Because this particular organization, university, their threshold for a major gift was 100,000 or more. And so one particular donor came in through our calling program, was $1,000 donor, and within 5 years was $1 million donor sitting on the board, and now has given the university well over $50 million in gifts.
Oh my, I love it.
That's one donor.
I love it.
That more than paid for anything we did over those 13 years for that
love
phone
it.
program, over and over. And we see that all the time. We've had folks we call over the phone. We ask them to consider a gift of $5,000, and they've given us 100,000 over the phone. It's a matter of doing it the right way, personalizing the appeal as much as you can.
Hey, let's go back to Margie's question.
Yep.
Amplify on what a birthday fundraiser
Sure.
is.
On Facebook, you're able to put fundraisers for your birthday. So it's my birthday, and in lieu of making a gift to me, consider making a gift to my favorite nonprofit, and then a link. And Facebook handles all the processing of those gifts and sends the nonprofit the money. They actually do not take a percentage.
Wow.
In fact, now during Giving Tuesday, they were matching gifts of $100 or more. So we certainly encourage our clients to put fundraisers up during Giving Tuesday. But I'm sure if you've been strolling through social media, you've seen friends who have put up fundraisers, birthday fundraisers. Some of us have probably even given to some.
Yeah. Anthony, I know you're big on the Giving USA report, which began, I think, in 1956. And basically the division of the pie hasn't changed that much. In other words, individuals have accounted last year, I think it was what, $485 billion was philanthropy. Individuals consistently account for 70%, and followed by corporations and foundations that I get like 15 and 20%. Does it take different strategies to promote an annual fund to an individual, a corporation, or a foundation?
Absolutely. I mean, the individual typically is giving because they believe in the impact the organization is having on the community, on students, on healthcare, on whatever social service you may be providing to the community. They believe in the organization. It's touched them typically in some way, right? They've been affected by it. The breast cancer survivor gives to a breast cancer organization. The graduate of XYZ University gives back to the university because they may have gotten scholarships or financial aid, and they want students to have that opportunity. When you're going out to corporations, it's a different, or grant makers, it's a different sell, because there you really have to talk to them about what impact you're having on the community and how that impact long-term will benefit their corporate mission and goals, right? So if you're a university, how our students are going into positions of leadership, that are ultimately going to be your consumers, or are going to be the people who work at your organization, right? Your company. If you're grant makers, why are we different? Why should you give to this organization as opposed to all the other nonprofits in the world, right? There's lots of competition, and you really got to set yourself apart. I always like, no matter what type of fundraising we're doing, to set ourselves apart with stories from donors rather than institutional perspective. And I know I'm old-fashioned in that way, but people give to people. And there's no more powerful story than a peer-to-peer story where a donor's saying, this is why I give back. So this is why I believe it's so important to give to this organization. Because if we're doing it through the lens of the organization, of course you want to raise more money. You work there, right? You have a vested interest in raising more money for the organization to make yourself look better for the board. It's your job, right? If it's coming from a donor, it's a totally different perspective.
Yeah.
This is how this hospital saved my husband's life. This is how it saved my wife's life.
That is very strong stuff.
This is how this university changed my career and my life, and made a life for my family, right? It gave me an opportunity I wouldn't have otherwise had. Those are the stories we should be telling on social media. Those are the stories we should be telling in our letters. Those are the stories we should be telling corporations. And if at all possible, we should take corporations that are already giving to us, who presumably now believe in our mission, right? Because we've
Yeah.
stewarded the relationship, and asking them to try to solicit other or use their name to solicit other corporations,
Yeah.
right? So it becomes peer-to-peer as well.
Yeah.
I love peer-to-peer fundraising in every way
Yeah.
because I think it's much more powerful.
Tomorrow something happens. The calendar turns to December, whether we like it or not. And I see something like 1/3 of all giving happens, annual giving happens during the month of December. Now, they probably should have started a while ago, but if you were to tell some of the folks listening how they can gear up for the December boom, what might be baby steps they can take right now?
Well, first, let me again give you one of my pet peeves, and that is that so much of the giving takes place in December because we've educated the donor that way, right? We've told the donor this is the time for you to give. With the tax laws changing, there for the smaller donors, it really doesn't have a tax impact as much to give in December.
Yeah.
But we've gotten them accustomed to the year-end appeal. This is the year-end appeal. In some cases, even June being a year-end appeal, right? Which means nothing to the donor when you think about it. They're not on a fiscal year, they're on a calendar year. So
Yeah.
it means nothing to the donor. That having been said, there's a variety of things that can be done before the end of the year. Certainly emails. I like combinations of emails, digital voicemails, which we talked about earlier, thanking donors this time of year for their giving, followed by some sort of email, and then followed by a text message of some sort. You can use all three of those. If you have the budget and the money, certainly making some year-end calls to thank donors and to ask them to consider making a gift is well worth it. There's still some time to do some of those calls.
What do you think of giving, I love this word, stuff, like lapel pins, pens, coffee mugs to annual fund donors?
Diane, I see your comment, and we have trained our donors to do that. Getting to your question, Jim, as I said earlier, I'm not a big believer in giving stuff for gifts. I think it's great to send a donor a gift afterwards just to thank them. But to make, I mean, I'm going to use PBS generally. All right. One of the biggest problems PBS ever has in getting people to give to them philanthropically is that their giving has become transactional, right?
Yeah.
Give $25, get a mug. Give $50, get a sweatshirt. Give $100, get these DVDs, right? And a lot of arts organizations do the same thing, right? It's premium. You give $1,000 and you get preferred parking, or you get preferred seating, or it makes it very difficult to turn that person from a transactional giver to a transformative giver or a philanthropic giver. And I think it's always much stronger, and ultimately you're going to get bigger upgrades and more buy-in when you bring in a donor who's coming on board because he believes in the organization, not because they're going to get a $25 mug, of which 15 is an expense for the organization, but because they believe you're making a difference in the world and it's important. And then thank them with a mug later, or with a pen, or whatever you want, but don't make the gift transactional.
Yeah.
We're working with a client, and I won't name them, down in your neck of the woods, they're in Texas, who over the years have made the giving so transactional that when we're reaching out and talking to donors, they didn't even understand they were giving. They didn't understand it was philanthropy.
Yeah.
You know, I was giving $600 a year because I got better seats, or I got the benefit of free parking, or, you know, something to that effect. They never saw it as a philanthropic gift to the organization.
Yeah. We were talking before that most people can give gifts several times greater through their estates than through their current wealth. Is it true that a great audience for planned gifts is repeat annual gift donors, say of 3 years or more? And even if the amount is relatively modest, say $100, those can be very, very prime prospects for legacy gifts.
100%. We look at as a company, people who have given for 20 or more consecutive years, regardless of how much they've given, 15 or more, 10 or more consecutive years. And then those who have given 20 or more consecutive gifts, maybe non-consecutively because they missed the year of the annual fund, 15 or 10 non-consecutive gifts, regardless of the amount. Survey after survey that's been done, Giving USA, as a matter, who you mentioned, did a whole analysis on this a couple falls ago, right? Every survey that's been done shows that tax avoidance is not the biggest motivation for people to make a plan gift. It's the same thing that motivates them to give an annual gift. They believe in your organization, right? And so a plan gift has become the major gift of the middle class. And part of the problem is all you have to do is ask them. And we're not doing a good enough job, I think, as a nonprofit community in making that ask. Once the ask is made, all the numbers are good, right? Because one of the things we know is that somebody who makes a planned gift to an organization of any amount will give during their lifetime, typically 6 to 7 times more during their lifetime. It's very powerful numbers.
Hey, repeat that again, will you?
People who make a planned gift to an organization of any amount tend to give 6 to 7 times more during their lifetime to the organization on average. And that's very powerful, right? So for many years, we thought, well, planned giving, that's for the future. And we're not going to see that now. And boards aren't as interested because that's deferred income, right? But that's the real number we've seen now over the last 15, 20 years. And Jim, you and I are old enough to know about the impending wealth transfer that 30 years ago, everybody was talking about.
$68 trillion.
Right.
Trillion.
They say between 58 and 72 trillion dollars. And I say, depending on what expert you talk to, I say, I don't care what expert is, that's a heck of a lot of money. Regardless of which one it is. It's happening right now to the tune of about $1 to $2 trillion a year. And so we're not doing enough to capitalize on those annual fund donors that could see their way towards making a legacy commitment to the institution. And it's one of the areas that I work with my clients on all the time, because all you have to do is ask them. And we, as you said earlier, Jim, we could probably do a whole webinar on planned giving. So it's a whole different topic. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes, your annual fund donors who are consistent are your best planned giving prospects.
Yeah. Okay. Board of directors. How should a nonprofit tap its board of directors to build its annual fund program?
Get a good board of directors.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to sound flippant, but a lot of times we put people on boards that really shouldn't be on boards. Right?
I mean, first of all, the board should be the first ones to contribute to the annual fund.
That's correct. And a lot of times that doesn't happen, right? I've sat on boards where I become the bad guy because I go in and I say, we're going to give $10,000 a year or $25,000 a year, or we're going to get $25,000 a year. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be on this board, right? So many times we put people on boards who don't go out there and get. I think number one is we have to train the board on how to effectively ask and the importance of making the ask. And number two, start them off by having them maybe make some of those phone calls we talked about, 5 by 10, thanking donors, right? So that they could get a feel themselves as to, hey, it's not bad to have these conversations with donors.
Yeah.
And look, they're resulting in gifts, right? Because if you have them have those thank you calls, they start seeing the results of those thank you calls, and they're going to be much more likely to be willing to go out and make the ask. But we also don't spend enough time training board members. And there's a lot of that AFP does, for example, local chapters. I know I just finished being president of the AFP Las Vegas chapter, and we brought in experts on how to train your board, right? And that's an opportunity for you to bring your board members into that AFP luncheon and train them.
Yeah. What's the difference in a nonprofit? What are they doing differently that they can retain an annual fund donor in the second year, as opposed to the nonprofit that doesn't retain the donor for the second year? The second year is so brutally important.
Well, they're likely doing a better job at stewarding the donor and keeping in touch with the donor throughout the year. If you are stewarding a donor correctly and thanking them, sending them the appropriate thank yous as their gift comes in, sending them emails, keeping them informed, letting them know how their money is being used, right? Going back to that donor loyalty, that's part of being loyal to the donor, letting them know the impact their gift is making, and not just always asking them for a gift, then you should be able to renew a first-time donor at a clip of about 50 to 55%. That should be the goal. Once they get through that first year, then you should be looking at upwards of 70% retention rates.
Okay, let's get inside the organization. How do you suggest a CEO or executive director decide who should be in charge of the annual fund?
Well, the person who should be in charge is somebody who knows the annual fund. I think too many times at organizations, it's the ugly stepchild, right? And so we assume somebody can go out and do this job and do this job at the same time. And that job, the annual fund job, is so critical because it's the front line of getting new donors in. We're going to create that pipeline. You need somebody who's dedicated to doing that job and to stewarding those donors, because that's how we end up, instead of getting a 50% retention rate, getting a 30% retention rate in first-year donors, because there wasn't somebody there paying attention with their hand on the wheels, right? Guiding the steering the car. And so it's important that we have somebody who's in charge of just that. And then you hire somebody who's qualified to do that.
How have you seen nonprofits use social media to create a buzz around their annual fund program?
So many times I see nonprofits not using social media to create a buzz, right? Especially in the university markets. Jim, you and I talked about universities. There's football scores, there's baseball scores, but there's nothing about philanthropy, nothing about fundraising. A lot of times nonprofits don't even control their own social media. Some other department does, right? Marketing or some other department, not the development department. I think one of the critical things, as I said earlier, is telling stories from the donor's perspective. Letting donors tell their stories on your social media. How powerful is that? You know, I created several Giving Tuesday fundraisers on my social media pages for organizations I support, right? And it was very powerful that I was able to put out my story as to why I give back to those organizations, why I believe it's important. And so doing more of that and less of the institutional voice on social media, I think, is important. Not trying to use Instagram, for example, to tell stories, instead tell stories with pictures. Not every social media platform is the same. They all need to be used differently, right? And sometimes we're trying to tell a story on Instagram where we should be telling a story with pictures. I always like getting donors involved. You know, I tell my clients, go out and ask your donors to put up pictures that remind them of the organization. It's amazing what you learn about the donors, more than you'll ever learn from some of the wealth screening that's out there. Donors will tell you what they think. If you get them engaged.
Anthony, we have learned a lot from you. You've done a beautiful job, not just responding, but managing time. If it's okay, John Largent, we're going to put your contact information on the screen. And I have one final question for you, Anthony. John, can you put Anthony's, it's okay if people think they can get help from Catapult, they can reach you at that email or that phone. And this is one of the leading firms. And Anthony, again, I want to thank you, not just for what you've done in building Catapult, but for what you've done for the fundraising profession and to lift up the nonprofit sector. So we're going to end with this kind of philosophical question, okay? If you could travel back in time, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Jim, we don't have enough time for that question.
No, I'll give you a minute because that's how much time we have left.
All right. Well, I want to say that you thank me for what I do for the profession. I'm blessed that I get to get up for the last 35 years and know what I'm doing is having an impact on people's lives, and I'm making a great living doing it. And I can think of nothing better than that. If I were to go back and give my 21-year-old self advice, I would give him the same advice I give my kids. And that's that, you know, failure is a good thing. Failure is not a bad thing unless you don't learn from it, right? When I was 21, I thought it was the end of the world. And now I realize that every time you fail, so long as you get up and try again, it's a learning experience to make your life better or what you do better, right? A lot of times we get stuck on that failure, and we can't get stuck on that failure because I've said for years, failure is not an option. And what I mean by that is you've got to keep moving forward, because as human beings, we have the benefit that no other species has. We get to get up every day and have a do-over.
Yeah.
Get it right the next day. And so
We'll talk about getting it right. We were getting it right to have you as our subject matter expert. And I better warn you, when you just do such a fantastic job as you've done, you're going to be asked back. So thank you again, Anthony Alonso. And I even like you as a Red Sox fan, and I know you love the Yankees. And what we're going to do, we're going to put a short summary of some major points on LinkedIn and Facebook. And then tomorrow, John Largent does a little spin dry, and we're going to post the recording of this webinar on both LinkedIn and Facebook. And more people actually are going to watch the replay than join us live. But again, Anthony, the hour has just flown by. Thank you, and thank you to Catapult Fundraising for everything you do for the nonprofit sector, okay?
thank you. It's our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, and
for
thank
having
you to our learning community. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Jay Frost, president of Frost on Fundraising.
Jay's fantastic. Tell him I said hi.
Okay, listen, stay well, be well, and thank you to our audience for all the wonderful work you're doing, touching, improving, and saving more lives. And we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you, Anthony. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.